Okay, well, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us here at Entrée Capital's webinar, Selling to Developers, How to Build a Successful B2D Go-to-Market Strategy. In this 45-minute conversation, we'll touch upon a few of the burning questions in the B2D space. Should startups selling to developers take a PLG approach, or is top-down the right move? What about an open source strategy? How has the DevTools market changed over time? And so much more. Before we get started, I just want to touch upon a few housekeeping items. On the bottom panel of the Zoom, you're going to see a section for Q&A. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask the panelists, please feel free to add them there. We're going to try to get to as many of those questions in the Q&A session that is going to take place at the end of the webinar. And just in your question, please make sure that you make it clear as to which panelists you're addressing. We've got some really incredible panelists here for you today. Sagi, Dudai, EVP Product and Engineering at JFrog, who are transforming the way that enterprises manage and release software updates. Yuval Hazaz, founder and CEO at Amplication, an open source development tool that helps you develop quality Node.js applications. Shimon Tolts, co-founder and CEO at Datree, which prevents misconfigurations from reaching production in Kubernetes workloads. And our moderator, Adi Gozes, partner at Entrée Capital. So without further ado, I'm handing it over to you, Adi, to kick this great conversation off.
Thank you, Faye, and thank you everybody for joining. So as some of you may know, we at Entrée Capital have been quite active in the developer tool space. In fact, just this past year, we've had multiple companies go out of stealth, including actually Amplication, which recently announced their seed round. And just super passionate about this topic. Myself, by the way, I myself come from a software development background, so even personally very passionate about it. And just super excited to have these amazing panelists with us. So we have really the entire breadth of selling to developers, from the very mature companies such as JFrog to through Datree and to Amplication. So just really happy to have everybody here, and let's kick it off. So just as a first topic, maybe it would be interesting to kind of go through how you see the developer tooling space change over the years. So we've seen the space transform quite incredibly. So just interested to hear your point of view. Maybe, Sagi, maybe we could start with you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Adi, and thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to be here. It's also a super interesting topic, and I'm glad that you guys are covering it and also brought up these great panelists. Relative to your question, we don't need to look back many years. It's just, if we just look at the last couple of years and what happened with COVID, just accelerated everything. Many years have been compressed into just a couple of years. In 2011, if I'm not mistaken, Mark Anderson said, software is eating the world, and now it is eating the world, and now software is the world. Everything is software, everyone is a developer. This acceleration have changed anything. We have so many more developers, and they need to have automation at the best level possible. Everything needs to be automated. User experience and onboarding and tooling needs to be so much better than they used to be just 2 or 3 years ago, because everything accelerated and became software. Everything around us is software. And so there's no time to waste. Everything needs to be automated. The example I use is that in old movies, we used to see supply chains like car manufacturing supply chain, but now software is a supply chain. And it's like every other supply chain, and like every other supply chain, it needs automation, and it also needs to be secured. So these are some of the things that I think changed dramatically in the last couple of years.
Shimon or Yuval?
I think that, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. I think that there is a major shift in the way that, developers used to be this person who, you know, writes features and throws them over the wall to DevOps. I'm sorry, it was production back then, to the production engineers, and they would get, you know, tools mandated to them that they have to use, unfortunately for them. But today the world is very different. You know, the developers, they can choose which tools they want to use, how they want to work, which computer they want. Some people come to interview in our office with their dog to see if the dog likes the office. So it's a whole new world, and today the developers are in the middle of it. They are the superstars.
Yeah, I agree. So just like my friends here said, I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for inviting me. I think just to complement what they both said, the last thing in this chain is the fact that all those products, it's not only created for developers and by developers, and they have all the power. Even the product themselves are now API first or developer first. Even the consumer of those products now shifting from just end users to developers, and it's like a circle of starting with creating the tool for the developer consuming the tool from the other hand, and they feeding each other. So yeah, I think that's a major change, and that's, like Shimon said, brings a lot of power to developers in making decision in the organization of how it's going to be built, what tools they're going to use, and they're making the decisions.
Yeah,
If
so-
you don't mind, I'll just add one more thing. I think there's one thing that didn't change, and I think the other panelists also said it, but I'll be more specific. You really need to have a great product in order to succeed. The developers has the power, they can choose whatever they want, but even in the past, you could not have succeeded without having a great product. And this is something that is the essence of everything we all do.
So I think that's a great segment to a great segue to really how you go to market. So, you know, you mentioned you need a very good product. You mentioned that the decision-making process has changed. So really I guess the question is, how do you think you should start? Should you start with the design partners? Should you go bottom up? Should you go top down? How would you, like, how do you take your first steps when going to market?
It's very simple. You need to call them and tell them, buy my software. No, of course, I'm kidding. I think that today, first of all, developers you don't sell to developers. Developers buy your software. And I think that it's a very important thing to emphasize, that it's 99% is a bottoms up motion where they go and learn and hear about your product and go and see a GitHub repository, see an influencer talk about it in YouTube, read about it. Then they want to play with it. They want to test it. No credit cards, nothing. And as Sagi said, it's product first. And I'm a big believer in product-led growth. And first they need to go and make sure that they can try it, they can use it, they can see the value. Then they can start to use it on a monthly basis, on a regular basis. And only then you can start talking about money. So it's the other way around of when we used to sell shelfware and then maybe get people to use it after they bought it. This is my opinion.
I even think it starts much earlier, Shimon, because the phase you're talking about is the phase that you already have a product and you want to let people use it and then decide if they want to buy it. But even before that, if you just have an idea, just go ahead, you're a developer, just go ahead, write something and put it online as an open source. And the acceptance of early adopters in the open source community is amazing. They come and they try the smallest feature or the smallest idea you have, and you start getting feedback. Even before you try to sell something, even before you understand you have something to sell, you can start developing. And many amazing products started as a personal project of a developer who wanted to solve his personal problem or personal concerns, and he just went ahead, he built something, and from there you start getting all the feedback, and then you decide to build a product and a company maybe later on top of it.
I couldn't agree more. I wish I could have disagree and spice it up a little bit here, but not for now. The only thing I'd add on top of what was already said, and I fully agree with, is that the developers, even though, like Shimon said earlier, even though the products they start for free, they test the product, they use it for a couple of months, they expect it to be a great product. It needs to be easy onboarding, perfect user experience. It actually needs to be reliable, or else they would just go elsewhere. So I couldn't agree more with my other panelists. Just the emphasis is that the products needs to be great from the get-go. Otherwise, the developers, they have the power, they will go and use other products.
I just want to add something, like if I put my a founder hat or cap or whatever I have, I'd say that I think that one question that a lot of colleagues, founders like me ask me, so Shimon, I go out there, I put some small open source, I talk to people, and maybe I get some design partners. And then the question is like, when is the right time to stop working with the design partners and working on the general masses of people that can come and consume your software? And it's a very tricky point, because when you come to a design partner and you talk to them and you have a direct line of communication, they will constantly pull you into building the deeper product, more and more features to what you already have. But at this point, what you actually want to do is to pave the way for people to even try the product. And even if you continue working with the design partners, they will just pull you into more features in the product, rather than thinking of how do I reduce the friction? How do I get people on board to even start trying my product? So I think that you should immediately, really as soon as possible, start working on your PLG self-service motion, because it's very different. People come to a website and they either try it or not. And you can't be there, you can't talk to them, you can't convince them. And this is, in my opinion, really the hard part. How do you get the initial traction for people to even try your software?
So actually that's a good question. So how do you get? I saw even we had on the chat someone asked like, what channels do you use? And like what channels does it work to spread the word? Do you also use open source? How do you go about it, really? Yuval.
So I think it's the best thing to do is to be where your audience is and be where your developers are. So really pro social networks and boards and like Reddit and Product Hunt and of course GitHub. This is where your audience is looking for information. This is how they read their news. This is how they discover new products. And you must be there, and you must, of course, provide the best product for them to start using it and realize that it's good for them. But if you will not be there, and if you try to just push it to them in the wrong channels, of course, it will not work. So just be where your audience is.
Yeah, I agree. I think that nowadays developers, I mean, we're engineers, right? We don't trust marketing. We don't trust sales. I'm sorry to say that, but that's reality. We do trust good products, and we do trust our friends, and we trust the development community. So to me, the best channels would be the community, and speaking with the community, staying close with the community, and you even have DevRel and other folks who are dedicated early on. You bring on these folks that are dedicated resources to be in touch with the community, and provided that you have a great product and you help the community and it adds value, to me, that's the channel and that's the go-to market especially for B2D products.
I think that maybe I'll start with the don'ts. Don't do thought leadership content, talking general senses, you know, the 300,000 feet sessions where they talk about empowering, like talk about the problem, talk about the solution. Really, the things that worked best for us, number one, engaging community leaders. So we worked with more than 30 influencers doing YouTube videos, blog posts, covering our tools. Some of them even put blog posts and videos where they say our tool is shit. And it's okay, because they say, what are the pros, what are the cons? And we're like, we're for it. We want to be for real. Here it is what it is. We're working to improve, but really it's an honest, real discussion that people can see what you're doing. And I relate with what Sagi said. One of the most important things is clarity, is authenticity. They want to understand that they're talking to people, that they're talking to real developers and engineers that understand them. So this is number one. Don't do leadership content. Number two, talk about the problem and talk about the solution. And number three, I don't know how deep you want to go into it, but there are also things that I really believe in, which is SEO and programmatic SEO. So for example, we've mapped all the Kubernetes errors that most people deal with. And then we had to actually reverse engineer the Kubernetes error generating code and understand what are all the errors. And then we wrote 15 articles for the most popular errors. So when people copy paste problems from the terminal into Google, they actually get into our website. And we don't try to sell them anything. We're like, this is the problem. This is why it's happening. This is the solution. If you want to learn more, you want to have more information, just click wherever you want, you can learn more. And by providing actual value, that you get credibility, you get clarity and authenticity, and then they evaluate your product.
You know, what's amazing to me is that what really stands out and also stood out when we were prepping for this webinar is how significant you all view the community. So it's really a major part of how you think about going to market, and I think it's very different than other plays where you know, like enterprise SaaS or be it what it may. But really, in this development world, community has very significant weight, and it's interesting to see how it kind of, you know, everybody like brings it up at some point or another. And I think it also brings, you know, various challenges in the beginning. You know, Sagi kind of briefly mentioned it, but, you know, you need the right people to build the community. You need to be really thoughtful about what community you want to build, where you want to build it. You need to figure out where your audience is, as Yuval said. So I think there's, you know, it's a very different play.
I think you touch on a very important point, right? We all speak about, and maybe we see this we're already a more mature company than some of the others. We strongly believe in product-led growth. We are selling, or we are approaching the developers. We are strong believers in the community. If the developer like your product, they will tell their friends, and they will tell their friends, etc. And this is the way to grow. Completely agree. So I haven't said anything new, but here is something that you touched on, is the enterprise play. At the end of the day, the people that would write the checks, especially the big checks, are used to having different sales cycles and different sales motion, and you need not forget them. I'm not saying that's the way to start. I'm saying the opposite, actually. You should start with a product. You should start with a developer. But at some point, when you grow beyond a certain scale and you need to reach out to these, the guys that write, or the girls that write the checks, you need not forget about that. And you need to make sure that you also keep them in the loop, keep them informed, sell to them through the channels that they are used to. Now, the influencers, if I go back to the earlier discussion, almost to the starting point, the way that they are going to hear about the products is through their developers, the ones that are going to like it and tell their friends. But at the end of the day, someone is going to need to write a check. And so you need to keep both. Just keep both in mind, and at the right time, you need to look at those enterprise roles and enterprise place, not forget them as well. I think this is some part of the secret sauce for growth and scale.
Yeah, I agree that you need kind of a top-down motion that meets your bottom-up motion.
Exactly.
I think that it's like growth plus sales, because at the end of the day, I think that today, like in my previous role, I was the general manager for the infrastructure division at ironSource. And, you know, no one came from top down telling me, you're going to buy MongoDB or something like that. And it was actually the other way around. It's like, hey, we're using our refactory. It's JFrog. It's awesome. It's amazing. If we reach the quota, Shimon, can we buy it, please? And like, what am I going to tell them? Like, no. like, what am I supposed to do? Like, no, rewrite everything. It's like, okay, we're gonna stop the roadmap for 1 month to move to Nexus. It's like, it's even unreasonable, right? So at the end of the day, I think it's a new era, as Sagi said, because it's the era where the bottoms up user, and I think that it's not just the developer, everyone in their work, you know, they want to use the tools that they want. Now that you're as a consumer, you can consume software that looks so good, works so smoothly, and then you come to work and you use some ancient tools, even not as a developer, like, what is going on? Why are we using this ancient tool? So I think that also of course, you need to have a sales cycle with the buyer, but I think that the end user and the buyer, they start to really merge, especially in DevOps and DevTools in a way. Of course, there are things that the buyer needs and you need to shepherd them through the process. But I think that once you have the bottoms up motion, it becomes almost obvious that it will happen.
Yeah. So kind of double clicking on the bottom up motion, but how do you guys really look at open source and open source strategy?
Put your code for free for everyone to see your code. Are you crazy? I think that, like, for us, when we started, we actually started with a solution that was just SaaS, and it was a GitHub application that would connect to your repositories and scan them for misconfigurations in Kubernetes manifests. And we encountered several problems. Problem number one, not everyone has GitHub. Some has GitLab, some has Bitbucket, some have their own, I don't know, something they invented. And number two, you know, when you're scanning code or you're storing artifacts for the customers, they often, you know, they're wary of what you're doing with their stuff, because at the end of the day, it's their most precious jewels. And then at some point we said, okay, we need to be agnostic and we need to give a clarity, authenticity, and to show that we're trustworthy. And at this point we said, okay, we're going to develop a CLI written in Golang, which is a great systems language. It's going to be open source under the Apache 2 license. And when we actually did this motion, it really engaged the community to come and share and use it. And now we have 5,000 GitHub stars, and we have 38 contributors, and I also only have 12 developers in my company. So most of the people who developed the Datree CLI do not work for Datree. And it's absolutely crazy to see someone opening an issue and someone else answering the issue, and no one actually works at your company. So I think it's a great way to do a go-to-market. And for us, the open source connects to our SaaS. So you can always have the open source by yourself. And for us, the commercial part of it is the centralized policy management. You can control all the open source components from a single location. We streamline policies to you, but it really plays along together. Of course, there are also many caveats to that. I don't know if you want to talk about it, like what happened to Redis and Mongo and AWS we can do a whole webinar on that, and now they changed their licensing. But overall, I think it's the preferred go-to-market model now, going some sort of open source.
Mm-hmm.
I can, you know, predict that in few years it will make no sense to build DevTools. There are no open source, and it will become really a basic requirements in order for developer to adopt tools. And when talking about selling to developers, they say don't talk about benefits, talk about features, and tell me what you do and not what will be my benefits. And talking about open source is even one step further, like show me how you do it. I don't want just to know what you do, I want to know how you do it. And that's part of building the trust on the tool itself, because your code looks cool and it's open source, and I see that you write tests and I see that you follow best practices. That's cool. I want to use that tool. No matter what the tool is doing, you already gain some trust. This tool is good. Now let's see what it's doing.
I'll add just, I completely agree with both my colleagues. I'll add a couple of other points, two more points. One is don't underestimate the work needed in maintaining open source, in being the owner and maintaining it. Sometimes, I know some inexperienced people may think that you build it once, you throw it out there, it's done. You've done your part to the open source, to the community. It's very far from. So especially if you're limited on resources, make sure that you consider that. I agree with Shimon and I agree with Yuval. It's also an enabler. It's also an accelerator, but only if you do it right and if you invest the needed resources in maintaining the open source. Otherwise, it's going to be a lost cause. The second point I'll mention relative to open source relates to a topic we covered earlier. It's yet another way we discussed earlier relative to product-led growth. Developers wanting to use your product, not a demo mode. They don't want to see a demo. They want to use your product for a while. And then when they get to the quota, then they might reach out to someone to pull out the credit card. But open source is another approach because everyone wants to use the product for a while before they pull out the credit card. So we strongly believe that having not only an open source, but also a free tier, a tier where you can use the product. And so I think this is also kind of related to the question.
Yeah.
I think that also to touch on Yuval's point, it opens a gate for developers and for your users to interact with you. Like Yuval says, everything now is like even API first. So this brings it to a place where there is a single location where they can actually go and talk to you and have a discussion that number one is open. Like we have people who open issues that we have like typos or bugs in our marketing website, which to me at the beginning, it was like very, very crazy. Like, but for them, it's like this, like, how am I supposed to talk to this company? I go and open an issue in GitHub. And it brings a really great place to talk and a single place where you can actually communicate between you and have an honest discussion. Now, in addition, I think that going open source, if we look 10 years back, it was like either you're closed source or if you're open source, usually companies would sell services, like would sell consulting support on top of it. And I think that in the last 5-7 years, it actually shifted towards being some of my solution is open source, but it also connects to my SaaS. And there is some mix and match between them. You can look at Elastic and their XSpec. You can look at different feature gates that in a way, some of them went to actually do feature gating that I less believe in, which is like really core product. Some of them went into feature gating like enterprise features, like, SSO and stuff that you just need as a large company. And also giving you the ability to just run it on the cloud rather than babysitting the servers by yourself. So I think it's a new world where open source does not mean that's it, I'm just giving support. It can be SaaS plus open source. And I think it's a new animal.
Where do you see the risks or what, you kind of, you also touched upon that, but, obviously when open sourcing, at least parts of your solution, you need to be very thoughtful on what you open source, there are risks And also, as you said, like if it used to be that monetization is very trivial, like, you know, you do support, then today there are more elaborate models. So how do you think about doing it right? Like, what risks do you need to take into account when you just start out?
When you just start out, I think the risks are very minimal. I think that you should just go and get feedback. Now, maybe one point that we haven't touched on in this webinar yet, which is always very, very dominant, especially in infrastructure and DevTools, is the battle of buy versus build. I think that every developer company, every dev tool encounter it's like, you go and there's always this guy, and it's like, what's the problem? I take these 5 open sources and I glue them together, and why do we need to pay this amount of money? And I think that by starting open source, you really reduce the barrier for them to start, even if it's just a feeling. You know, sometimes they want the feeling of, I can always go and run it by myself if I want to. The opposite part of it is that you are open to your competitors. People can copy what you do, but you need to really have a strong sense of belief that what you're doing is just and right, and you believe in it and you do it the best way. And people go with you not because you have feature X or Y now. They go with you because they believe in your vision. They believe in what you're doing. And I think that the most radical example of this is GitLab. GitLab even has their own, like Jira, their own board open, and their product managers are doing competitive analysis and writing the competitive analysis of GitLab's competitors in an open source way. And the competitors can read what they think about them and what are the differences between them. And I think that the main thing is they're saying, listen, we're here not because our code is magical, not because we're some unicorns, but because we believe that we're doing it the best thing for the customers, and we will be with them, and we will build whatever is needed. The flip side of it is when you get big, the Goliaths may come. And we can look at the Elasticsearch story. Shai Benon, which is also Israeli, who recently went back to Israel, you know, he woke up one day to see that like most of his software is running on AWS on the service. And then this huge battle started, including Redis Labs, which is also an Israeli company, and MongoDB and Elastic, and they all changed the license and forked, and they disabled the ability for infrastructure Goliaths to run their software. But I think that if you get to this point, you're already in a good position. So I wouldn't try to optimize for that.
I agree, and I can even say that I have a feeling that in a couple of years, the formal open source licenses will adapt to the situation in order to protect like open source project, and those special licenses that are not strictly open source probably will be part of the formal open source licenses.
I agree. It's mostly goodness, and we touched on the risks earlier. Some of the efforts needed and some of the risks relative to competition and IP, but it's mostly goodness. So
I have a question to Sagi, if I may, Adi. Sagi, today you're a very mature company, $170 million of ARR last time I checked and talked with Shlomi.
A bit more than that, but
okay, I'm sorry, I'm not up to date, you know, 10 million here, 10 million there.
It's all good.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Rounding error.
Yeah, rounding error. JFrog is an amazing story. And my question to you is like, now that you're in the future and as someone who runs engineering and product, so do you still develop open source? How do you decide what do you put in open source, what do you not put, where is the limit? Each product has an open source leg or only some of them? Like today as a mature company, how do you deal with it?
It's a great question. And like you said earlier, it requires a separate webinar just to you know, answering all these questions. I'll try to be concise in the interest of time. I think we're almost running out of time, and I do want to leave time for questions coming from the audience. So short answer is we think about open source and we think about the community all the time in everything we do. What can we open source? What makes sense? We want to solve problems for the developers. We want to stay close to the community. We want to give back to the community, and we do that every time we can. I can tell you that we're thinking about a bunch of interesting ideas as we speak right now. But I don't think, even now that we're bigger and we have a larger group and more of a streamlined process relative to open source, I can't give you a recipe. Not because I don't want to, just because there are some very deep discussions and considerations relative to what would you open source and when. So unfortunately, on a couple of minutes, I can't just give you a recipe. I can tell you that even larger companies, as we are and larger than us, keep thinking about that. How can we give back? How can we stay close with the community? And JFrog has been doing that and will be. So here is like a scoop, a promise. We'll be doing that some more in the foreseeable future, which is not far from now.
I love it. We even got a scoop.
A mini one.
An open source one.
So I think going back to something that you said, Shimon, which is we're really seeing some great companies come out of Israel in this space. So at least my perspective is that, you know, Israelis have very strong developers, and it makes a lot of sense that also the companies that are for developers that there will be many great companies coming out of here. I'd love to hear kind of how you see, like where you see the opportunities and how you see like the place of the Israeli ecosystem.
Yeah, so just for the sake of the viewers, I'm also running a group of, it's called Upwards. We have 220 founders that run companies that are PLG, like Yuval and myself. And I think that this happened because we are in Israel, and Israelis like Tachles, and this is what Yuval said: don't talk about benefits, talk about what it does and how it works. And at the end of the day, it's like really, it's like for us, like, this marketing bullshit, what is it at the end of the day? Like, what does it do? So I think that in that regard, it really resonates with the general, you know, Israeli mentality. And secondly, there are a lot of people here in R&D. Unfortunately, you know, the go-to-market teams in Israel is still in building, because if I look back at our, you know, our brothers and sisters, the larger companies, you look at them, all of them, you know, all the CEOs relocate to the United States, to the UK, they hire people in sales and marketing that are from the United States or other places. And in a way, it's very sad to me because, you know, some founder told me, you know, Israel is becoming an offshore operation. You know, it's like, we have the best R&D. It's like, yeah, but this is what offshore do. They have the best R&D and they hire a lot of people. Places that build businesses have a great salespeople and marketing people and go-to-market people and R&D people, but the R&D is not the leading flag. And I came back to Israel after, in 2020, most of the year I was in San Francisco. And currently most of my companies in Israel, and I hope that we can continue and do this in Israel. The second point, I think, is that in terms of time zone and also the Israeli mentality, building a bottoms-up dev tool or PLG company just makes sense to us. We are 10 hours away from California in terms of time zone, depends on daylight savings. We are really far to the market, and we just want people to use our software and try it and do it. And I think that the era of the sleazy salespeople taking you to steak dinners, and I don't want to say other things that people do in other fields and security fields and areas, but you know, I think that it less resonates with the Israelis, and the more and more we go, I think starting COVID, most of the companies that I saw here are doing like bottoms up, self-service, layering sales later on. So this is my take. I think it's just going to continue this way.
Yeah, I have to say personally that I think also the ecosystem has matured in the sense that we're seeing, you know, companies that have already gone through figuring out their go-to-market. There are more and more companies where the CEO did not relocate and they actually managed to grow the company from Israel, and seeing more and more Israelis with expertise of also going to market. You know, we have in our portfolio Monday as well, which
Yes.
yeah, which is like the poster child. So yeah.
But I have a question to you, Adi. Do you think that the investor community has also matured? You know, from the general, show me the $1 million ARR in the Series A round. Do you think that investors are maturing and looking into usage metrics and retention metrics and also knowing how to cope with those type of startups?
So again, I feel like for this, we need another webinar. I think that definitely there's, well, it depends who you speak with, right? And it depends about, you know, depends what stage you are. So it's a very complicated question. I think that definitely there are many VCs that already look at usage metrics and, you know, are very, very thoughtful about how to look at a business and how to look at the community metrics, but probably not all of them for sure. I think some still, you know, look for the very more classical top-down sales. And in general, like the investing space has also gone through a lot of changes, probably more to come. I don't know. We'll probably see. At least I anticipate that there will be, you know, a more of a shift back to actually to the more traditional, like, you know, right. We had in 2021, there was like a peak of companies raising really big rounds at really high valuations. I think that will calm down a bit.
Coming back to senses, to normal numbers.
Yeah, if you ask me.
I'm going to hop in here because we are really out of time and I've got so many great questions that came in through the Q&A. So I think there's so much more of this conversation that we can answer through these questions. So I'm going to go in, and the first question is for Sagi. Given that you think that you need an excellent product, right? And you had mentioned that a few times, you need a good product. Do you think that means the death of the MVP concept or idea where you can't release anything basic and then build up from that? And then if any of the other founders here want to jump in on that, because of your, you know, very strong approach of open source, you obviously probably released initial baby steps in the beginning. So I want to kind of open up that conversation. MVP, understanding that when it comes to the B2D space.
I think it's actually the opposite. We need to go to market and get feedback faster and sooner. That doesn't mean we need to put something bad out there. We need to do a good job. And I'm going to give credits here. One book I really liked is inspired by Marty Kagan from the SVPG group. And it talks about rapid prototyping and how you build a really great product really quickly. It's much faster than the traditional MVP, where you took a few months and then you released something which you weren't sure about if your customers are going to like or not. Marty speaks about rapid prototyping. Just spend a couple of days, build a prototype, get a few design partners, help them build the product with you, and then keep iterating on it in a matter of days between each iteration to one another. So long story short, MVP isn't that. It's actually, you need to build, there are ways to build products, really great products that your customers love quickly with a subset of the overall functionality. So definitely not.
I would love to jump in on that with a personal story and also to say, like, in the top-down era, what you would do is like you would write down 7,000 features, go hunt for people, and then we tell you, we want this thing. We're like, yeah, of course we have that. Then you go back, oh my God, we need to build this now, fast. We need to build this for the next meeting so we can sell it to the person. I think that today it's really different. I'll give a personal story. For us, when we built our CLI, it was absolutely crucial to release an MVP as soon as possible. So our first release was actually a CLI with 3 commands, which is the tree help, the tree version, and the tree test. And we had one web page with 30 toggles of policies, and you can just turn on and off every policy that you want. And that's it. That was the entire product we launched with. And people really loved it because it was really simple. So I think the MVP is not dead. It just needs to be very scoped and very narrow to a specific problem and use case.
Great, thank you. Let's move on to the next question. This one specifically is for Yuval, unless Yuval, you want to hop in on that if you want to add in anything
I'm
about
good.
the MVP.
Let's move on.
Amazing. When it comes to product market fit and understanding the product market fit matrix, what do you think are things that are really important? And specifically, this question was to track in a product like Amplication, but what are the things you're tracking when it comes to product market fit?
I think related to Amplication, the holy grail is apps in production eventually. So organization user using Amplication to build apps that actually runs in production. There are several other KPIs and metrics that we need to measure higher in the funnel, like signups and activation and type of use cases, type of companies, and so on, type of commitment and engagement with the open source part of the product. But bottom line is apps in productions. That's no question for us.
Anyone else want to add into that one as well? Nope. Okay, fantastic. Let's move on. Now, this is kind of a bigger question that a lot of you all touched upon, but I kind of want to hone in on it a little bit, right? We have, if the product serves the developers, and we're talking about, we're selling to developers here, they're obviously not always the decision makers when it comes to kind of bigger companies, right? So we're talking about, let's say this can save the company and the CTO or the VP R&D specifically a lot of money, but because this is not necessarily a serious pain point for them, they're not necessarily willing to get on board as design partners. And the developers don't necessarily have the power so much to really push it internally when it's one of these very big companies. So what would you say to someone to advise them on what should they do, right? If the developers don't have that power, and then the people that do have the power don't even have this as a pain point.
Next problem.
Many other companies.
If it's not a major pain point for someone, you know, it's just not worth the time and go on a big problem that is really hurting now.
So I think to hone in on this question, because, you know, and maybe this, you guys did answer it properly, but if it's a pain point for the actual developers, but the CTO or the VP R&D doesn't realize it as a pain point, would you answer that question differently if it came from the pain point is for the developers, but not necessarily for the top guys?
I think it will be. If it's a pain point for the developer, we were all CTOs and VP R&Ds and whatever. And if this problem was a pain point for the developers, not just one specific individual developer. Usually, like I said earlier, I think if there's a solution to a pain, I don't need to tell the CTO. I need to tell my friend, the one that sits next to me. She will tell her friend, and she will tell her friend. Soon enough, it will become known to the CTO or VP R&D, and it will become a pain point for that person. So I would not, just my experience. I don't know if other people have different experience, but that is my experience.
Beautiful. This question is for Adi. You know, when a founder pitches you, or a founder that has a DevTool or a B2D product pitches you about their startup, what do you think about as an investor? What are you looking for as an investor? And what are the kind of top yes and no items that you think about when you're choosing whether to invest or not?
So I think similarly to other areas, I'm looking for super strong team that know what they're doing, that understand the pain and understand the domain very, very well. a problem that's big enough. So, answering a big enough pain has the potential to grow to be a very significant company. And also, I personally like, and at Entrée in general, we're very thesis driven in terms of timing as well. So, if there's a very strong why now, if there's some tailwind that I believe can take this company and help it grow much faster. And if there's, a reason to believe that, okay, I understand why there hasn't been a solution like this in the past, and why right now is the right time for the solution, or why right now is the right time for a different approach to a specific problem. So I think that's like the main things. So very strong team, understand the domain, strong founder fit, founder market fit, which is generally the case in developer tools, just because it's always developers for developers. But also having a big enough opportunity, which I think that might be a challenge sometimes. So sometimes it's just not, addressing a big enough pain, and the timing. So, addressing a big enough pain that's also, that there's good reason why it hasn't yet been solved.
Great. This question is for someone, one of the two of you guys that have a really very established company, been around for a little while. How do you measure retention when it comes to your B2D product? Not necessarily when it comes to monitoring or the analytics products, but when it comes to things, let's say app or widget creation or API consuming products, et cetera, how would you measure that retention?
So I'm going to disappoint the person who asked the question, because the way we are measuring retention is based on the metrics that the guy the person who asked the question did not want me to relate to. We are looking at the normal metrics, the ones that relate to usage. In our case, it's binaries, it's download, it's actions done on binaries. And then we are also looking to see repetitive usage from similar IPs or similar users. It depends on the case, on the information that we have. So it is more, I mean, there's a lot to get from there. So that's the way we look at it.
Great. Let's go back to the focus on that product being perfect or not yet product being perfect. How would you go about acquiring your first customers if you don't yet have a perfect product? The customer, the moving from it being open source to now gaining your first customers. What does that process look like, and how would you go about doing that?
Customer, like paying customer, or first users of the product?
Paying customers, not first users.
Paying customers should be really easy. They should be using your product all the time. They should be very enthusiastic. Your product doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to answer, you know how many shitty products I use every day? It just answers my problems, and I pay for it because it works. I don't think it's very good, but it works for me. So I think that at this point, if you have users that are using it on a weekly, monthly, whatever basis, and they enjoy it and like it, they will pay for it. And you just need to improve on your product and help your customers, and it will come.
And would you change that answer when it's not necessarily your first paying customers, but your first users?
Absolutely. First users is very, very different. First users you need to intrigue them enough for them to actually spend time to try your product, which is crazy if you think about it. You know how much developers' time is worth now. It's a lot of money. So I think that it's important, as we talked before, to build a community, to build credibility, to be very, very clear. We prevent misconfigurations in Kubernetes. Like, it is very like narrow and very, it's not, we improve development processes by making your production. No, it's like, it has to be very clear. And when someone understands what are you doing, what is your call to fame, what you're supposed to do, then we're like, oh, okay, I'll try it. And it is very hard to narrow down a simple messaging. So just try to get as many people. Some hacks that I can suggest is go to Upwork, pay $100 to 10 DevOps engineers to show you a blind like user interview. You go like, this is my website, good luck. And then you look at what they're doing and you see how they're exploring, and you like, click here. Why aren't you clicking here? And like, no, they don't see the button at all. And you're like, oh my God, how do they not see the button? So those are just small hacks that you can do in order to improve the first usage of the product that we did.
I like that.
A lot of you guys spoke about speaking to your users, building this community, or getting, if your product is good enough and people are using it, can we start from the bottom and say, how do you even get your solution to these users or your offering to these users? We had mentioned a few times community. Is it only through individual communities? Are you going one by one? What were your early days? And maybe Yuval, this is a good thing for you. How are you starting off even getting people to use?
So I can tell you the exact date and time even. It was one message in Hacker News. We somehow reached first place in Hacker News, and since then everything just bombed out. So tens of thousands and visitors from 0 to that number in overnight. So of course we prepared to that announcement on Hacker News. We make sure all the flows and the website are correct and the messaging is correct and the product is ready. But once we put that on Hacker News and it worked out successfully, since then it was like really, really great. But it never stops. So once we did that, that was the announcement. But since then you have to be on Twitter and on meetups and writing blogs and on the right mediums and be with the community everywhere. But eventually, if you're looking just for this one point of starts, January 12, 2021, 7 p.m. Israel time.
Fantastic. We are now at our last 3 minutes before we close this up. Is there any just advice that any of you guys would just throw out there for somebody that's here listening to this webinar? They're pre-seed founder, they're in the beginning stages, and they want to get started.
Just write code and put it on GitHub. That's first steps. If you start there and you do something correctly, you will find a way to continue from there.
I'm in the movement of say no to book a demo, say yes to get started.
Great. Sagi?
I'm going to spice it up just at the end, right? Many of my engineering friends would do just that, would exactly do that. And then 6, 9, 12 months later, they would come back and say, I wish I understood the space a little bit more. I wish I talked to some other folks. I wish I knew the customer better. I wish I knew the pain better. I wish I knew the problem better. So this is the advice you just got. It's a good advice. Don't get me wrong. It's a great advice. It goes with your gut. And many times going with your gut is the right thing. Sometimes you need to do some research, get to know the pain, and I'm sure Adi will agree with me that getting to know the pain is a different approach, and it fits others. It fits others. Not necessarily the same people would fit the same advice, but before you go, for some people, before you go and put something out there, get to know the space really, really well, get to know the pain really, really well, and then put something out there quickly, because it's going to be much more focused and direct to the pain that you're trying to solve. So just towards the end, I managed to spice it up a little bit.
Beautiful. And I think that's a perfect way to end, unless Adi, you have something else that you want to leave as advice for those listening.
Come speak with Entrée.
that is
Shameless plug.
Thank you to everyone that was here. If your question was not answered in the Q&A, because we had so many, couldn't get to them all, please send them over to me at faye@entreecapital.vc. Please include in that exactly who you'd like to have answer your question, so I can email the panelists directly and then have them send over their answer to you. So thank you again for everyone that joined us here, and looking forward to being in touch. Bye,
Thank
guys.
you.